The morning sun filtered through the curtains of a modest apartment, its pale gold light catching the steam rising from a cup of black coffee. Isabella Montero sat at her kitchen table, her fingers tracing the chipped edge of a porcelain mug, the last thing her mother had given her before she passed. The mug was cheap, the kind sold at flea markets, but to Isabella it was a relic, a reminder. She was 45 now, though her sharp eyes and quiet confidence made her seem ageless. Her clothes were simple, a faded blue blouse, trousers that had been repaired more than once, and shoes polished to a shine, but clearly worn. To anyone glancing her way on the street, she was invisible, just another middle-aged woman carrying the weight of an ordinary life. But beneath that unassuming exterior was a mind that had outmaneuvered Wall Street, a woman who'd built a financial empire from nothing but grit and a refusal to accept the world's limits. Flashback: a dirt road on the outskirts of São Paulo, 1985. Young Isabella, no older than 7, clutched her mother's hand as they walked home from the market. The heat was oppressive, the air thick with the smell of dust and diesel. A sleek car roared past, its windows tinted, its occupants laughing behind glass. Her mother squeezed her fingers. "Don't stare, Filha. Those people live in a different world." But Isabella had stared, and in that moment something hardened inside her. Her assistant, Daniel, laid a folder on her desk. "The dealership's financials. They're struggling, but the brand still has value." Isabella flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. She hadn't forgotten the way her mother's shoulders sagged after cleaning houses all day, the way shopkeepers' smiles vanished when they saw her patched dress. Now she owned those shops, those streets, and yet she still drank from that chipped mug. Isabella knelt before a weathered headstone, her fingers brushing the engraved letters. Maria Montero, loved, missed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The wind carried her promise as she stood, straightening her blouse. Today she would walk into a temple of arrogance, not as a billionaire, but as the woman the world had always overlooked. What happened next would teach that. Dealership, and everyone watching, a lesson they'd never forget. The glass doors of luxury motors reflected the midday sun like the entrance to a palace, their polished surfaces designed to intimidate as much as impress. Inside, the air smelled of leather and ambition, a carefully curated illusion of success. Salesmen in tailored suits lounged near six-figure cars, their practiced smiles reserved only for those who looked the part. Isabella stepped inside, her worn shoes silent against the marble floor. No one glanced her way. At the far end of the showroom, Carlos Mendez, head salesman and self-appointed gatekeeper of exclusivity, leaned against a gleaming sports car, regaling his team with last night's exploits. His cufflinks caught the light with every animated gesture, his Rolex an unsubtle declaration of his worth. He didn't notice Isabella until she stood directly in front of him. "I'd like to see your most expensive vehicle," she said, her voice calm, a beat of silence, then laughter. Carlos smirked, eyeing her from scuffed shoes to thrift store blouse. "Our most expensive car?" He emphasized the word "our," as if the mere idea of her belonging here was absurd. "The LaFerrari in the back? That's $2.3 million before taxes." His tone dripped condescension, the kind reserved for children, asking for the moon. Isabella didn't flinch. "I'd like to inspect it." Across the room, Luana Silva, the newest hire, stiffened. At 26, she still remembered what it was like to be dismissed. Her first week here, Carlos had joked that her accent, she was from the north, made her sound unrefined. Now, she watched as he circled Isabella like a shark, his voice loud enough for the whole showroom to hear. "Inspect it?" Carlos chuckled, turning to his colleagues. "Should we let her sit in it too? Maybe take a selfie for Instagram?" A few salesmen snickered. One mimed snapping a photo. Luana stepped forward. Sir, I can show you the… Luana. Carlos cut her off with a glare. Mr. Almeida's test drive is in 10 minutes. Go prep the paperwork. Isabella's gaze flicked to Luana, just for a second, but it was enough. A silent acknowledgement. A shared understanding. Carlos, mistaking Isabella's silence for defeat, sighed theatrically. Look, Senora, this isn't a museum. We cater to serious buyers. He gestured toward the door. There's a bus stop down the street, maybe start there. The room froze. Even the other salesman hesitated. Isabella didn't move. Then, with glacial precision, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded newspaper, yesterday's financial section. A circled headline read, Montero Holdings acquires stakes in 3 European automakers. Carlos's smile faltered. You're right, Isabella said softly. This isn't a museum. She let the newspaper drop onto the hood of the LaFerrari. But by tomorrow it might be mine. Carlos's face flushed crimson. Security, he barked. 2 guards materialized, their hands hovering near their radios. Isabella didn't resist as they escorted her out, but at the door, she turned. Not to Carlos, to Luana. You have potential, she said. Then to the room at large. Pity this place doesn't. The glass doors hissed shut behind her. Carlos exhaled, rolling his eyes. Another lunatic. Jesus. He adjusted his tie, already forgetting her. He shouldn't have. Because at that exact moment, Isabella's lawyer was dialing a number, and the words he'd soon speak would turn Luxury Motors upside down. Initiate the buyout, immediately. The rain had started by the time Isabella slid into the back seat of her unremarkable sedan, a 10-year-old Volvo with peeling paint and a faint smell of old coffee. To the valets at Luxury Motors, it was just another eyesore in their lot of polished chrome and carbon fiber. None of them noticed the man waiting inside, his fingers flying across a tablet as data streamed across its surface. Did they bite? Isabella asked, shaking the rainwater from her sleeves, like sharks in a feeding frenzy. Eduardo Vasquez, her chief legal counsel, handed her the tablet. Their parent company is desperate for liquidity. They've been hiding debt in shell companies for years. A few well-placed calls, and they'll beg us to take it off their hands. Isabella scrolled through the documents. Loan defaults, hidden liabilities, even a pending lawsuit from a customer who'd been overcharged for custom adjustments that didn't exist. Luxury Motors wasn't just arrogant, it was rotting from the inside. Do it, she said, but don't lowball them. Eduardo raised an eyebrow. I want them to think they've won, she clarified, her voice as smooth as the leather seats Carlos had been so proud of. Let them celebrate, then pull the floor out from under them. Carlos was halfway through his 3rd whiskey when the call came. You're what? He slurred into the phone, his breath fogging up the neon-lit bar mirror behind him. Selling, the regional manager repeated, giddy. Some investment group just offered 20% above market value. No due diligence, no haggling. They want everything. Inventory, real estate, even the branding rights. Carlos's grip tightened around his glass. Who the hell would overpay for our dump? Who cares? Bonuses hit next week. The news spread through the dealership by dawn. By lunch, salesmen were joking about dumb money and planning vacations in the Maldives. Only Luana hesitated, her stomach twisting as she watched Carlos preen like a peacock. This doesn't feel right, she muttered to the only colleague who'd ever been kind to her, Jorge, the elderly janitor. He wiped down a windshield, his roomy eyes knowing. When the devil pays full price, Menina, he's not buying. He's collecting. The takeover papers were signed at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday, the exact time most employees start mentally clocking out. Isabella's team chose it deliberately. Announce the ownership change after close of business, she instructed Eduardo. I want them to have the weekend to reflect. And so at 5:03 p.m., as Carlos shrugged on his designer overcoat, an email pinged on every company phone. Effective immediately, Luxury Motors is a wholly owned subsidiary of Montero Holdings. All staff will report Monday at 8 a.m. for mandatory reassignment evaluations. The color drained from Carlos's face. Montero. The name from the newspaper, the woman he'd thrown out. His phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Carlos? Isabella's voice was honey over steel. You'll want to sit down for this. The showroom lights buzzed to life at 7:55 a.m., revealing a scene no one had expected. Every car had a sold sticker on its windshield. The coffee machine, the one Carlos had bragged cost more than Luana's monthly rent, was gone, replaced by an industrial-sized urn of cheap Brazilian brew. A single chair sat in the center of the room. Isabella occupied it, legs crossed, sipping from that same chipped mug. Carlos stumbled in at 8:15, his tie crooked, his breath reeking of panic. You can't just fire you, Isabella finished. Oh, Carlos, I'm not firing you. She set down her mug. I'm demoting you. A projector flickered to life, revealing a flowchart. Luana Silva, new general manager. Jorge, the janitor. Head of customer experience. Carlos Mendez, valet attendant. You bitch, Carlos spat. Isabella smiled. And you have a parking lot to manage. Your first task? Washing Luana's new company car. She tossed him a set of keys. It's the LaFerrari. Try not to scratch it. The first Monday under new ownership unfolded with the quiet precision of a well-executed chess move. Employees trickled into Luxury Motors with a mixture of trepidation and cautious optimism, their eyes darting between the unfamiliar faces in crisp Montero Holdings lanyards and the conspicuous absence of certain egos that had once dominated. The showroom floor. At precisely 8:17 a.m., Luana Silva stepped out of the subway, her usual hurried stride replaced by something steadier, more deliberate. The weight of the email she'd received over the weekend, "Your leadership is required immediately," had kept her awake, her mind spinning with disbelief. She had spent years being told she was too soft, too naive, and now, with a single signature, the woman who had been laughed out of the dealership had handed her the keys to its future. The glass doors slid open. Silence fell, every head turned. Carlos, already sweating in his ill-fitting valet uniform, dropped the sponge he'd been using to half-heartedly wipe down a bumper. His mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. "Good morning, Luana," said her voice clear, no hesitation. "We have work to do." By noon, the changes were undeniable. Commission structures had been replaced with salaries and team-based bonuses, eliminating the cutthroat sabotage that had festered under Carlos's reign. The VIP lounge, a gaudy mahogany-paneled room where high-paying clients were once plied with champagne while others waited for hours, was being converted into a childcare area for employees and customers alike. Every price tag now included a breakdown of profit margins, a radical transparency that made the remaining old guard salesmen squirm, but the most jarring shift was the customers. Word had spread overnight, not about the ownership change, but about the woman who'd been humiliated and then bought the place. By lunchtime, the showroom was packed not with the usual affluent clientele, but with ordinary people, nurses, teachers, small business owners, all drawn by whispers of a dealership that might finally treat them with dignity. An elderly woman, in a faded floral dress, approached Luana, her hands trembling around a worn purse. "Is it true?" she whispered. "You let people test drive, even if they don't look rich?" Luana, remembering the way Isabella had looked at her, seen her, smiled. "Let's find you the perfect car." The valet station was a purgatory of asphalt and exhaust fumes. Carlos, his designer shoes ruined by puddles, glared at the showroom windows where Luana moved with an authority he'd never possessed. His phone buzzed. A notification from Banksia Capital, the lender for his penthouse. Payment overdue. Then, another. Mercedes-Benz lease. Final warning. He hurled the phone into a trash bin. It clattered against the metal, drawing snickers from two junior salesmen, his former subordinates. "Problem, valet," one mocked. Carlos lunged. Security intervened. Isabella, watching from her office upstairs, sipped her coffee. "Terminate him," she told Eduardo. "But do it at 4:59 p.m. I want him to almost think he survived." In the break room, Jorge polished his new nameplate, Director of Customer Experience, with the same care he'd once reserved for hood ornaments. "They're scared of you," Luana teased, handing him a coffee. Jorge chuckled. "Good. Scared men. Listen." He'd already drafted a plan: free maintenance clinics for single parents, honest mechanic referrals, even a no-credit check lease program for rideshare drivers. "You know why she picked you?" Luana asked. Jorge's smile faded. "Because I'm the only one who never laughed." By closing time, the story had morphed into legend. She paid in cash. No, she bought the bank that financed them. "I heard she's test driving every dealership in the city, hunting for the next arrogant idiot to destroy." Isabella let the rumors swirl. Let the fear seep into every corner of the industry. As she left that evening, a young valet, newly hired, wide-eyed, rushed to open her car door. "Ms. Montero, I just wanted to say thank you." She paused. "For what?" "My mom's a janitor at a hospital. Yesterday, her boss started calling her ma'am." He swallowed. "I think it's because of you." Isabella nodded. "Tell her to expect a raise." The first frost of winter glazed the sidewalks outside Luxury Motors, but inside, the air hummed with an unfamiliar warmth. 6 months had passed since Isabella Montero had walked into this temple of arrogance as a nobody and rewritten its destiny. The changes were no longer just policy adjustments or staffing shifts. They had crystallized into something far more powerful, a cultural reckoning. Luana Silva's office, once Carlos's glass-walled trophy room, was now cluttered with community outreach proposals and sticky notes in 3 languages. Her latest project, Keys for All, had just secured city funding to provide low-interest car loans to essential workers. The local news had dubbed her the People's CEO, a title that still made her blush. Across town, Jorge's No Tricks Just Cars initiative had gone viral, with viral videos of him explaining shady dealership tactics to retirees racking up millions of views. His blunt honesty had sparked a movement. 3 other dealerships had adopted his transparency policies in desperation to salvage their reputations. And Carlos? The man who once strutted through showrooms like a peacock now haunted the edges of the industry. After his termination, he'd burned through savings, then connections, then dignity. The last sighting was at a used car auction, where he'd reportedly begged for a commission-only sales job. The owner, a former victim of his sneering, had laughed in his face. The press speculated endlessly about why a billionaire would bother humiliating a mid-tier dealership. "Corporate revenge porn," screamed one tabloid. "A marketing stunt," insisted a business blog. They were all wrong. The truth sat in a locked drawer of Isabella's desk. A faded photo of her mother, standing beside a broken-down sedan, her uniform wrinkled from a double shift. Scrawled on the back in Portuguese, "One day you'll make sure no one feels this small." This wasn't about Carlos. It wasn't even about Luxury Motors. It was about proving that dignity could be systemic, that one woman's quiet rage could recalibrate an entire industry's moral compass. On the anniversary of her mother's death, Isabella returned to the dealership at dawn. The night crew had left the lights on, a security measure Luana implemented after a homeless teen was caught sleeping in a demo car. She ran her fingers along the hood of the LaFerrari, now displayed under a new sign. This vehicle fueled an empire. It now fuels change. Test drives, $50,000. All proceeds fund vocational schools. A cough echoed from the doorway. Luana, bundled in a coat, held out a steaming cup. "You forgot this." Isabella accepted the chipped mug, the same one from that first morning, and took a sip. The coffee was terrible. Burnt, overbrewed. Perfect. "What now?" Luana asked. Isabella gazed at the sunrise bleeding through the windows. "Now," she said softly, "we do it again somewhere else." Days later, a major automaker announced ethics training for all dealership staff, citing shifting consumer expectations. 6 months later, the first Montero School for Automotive Ethics opened in Lisbon, its curriculum co-designed by Jorge. Year later, a viral photo showed a janitor at a rival dealership being promoted to sales. His first customer? Carlos now, a rideshare driver leasing a used hybrid. The screen fades to black. White text appears. "Never underestimate the quiet ones. They're too busy changing the world to boast about it." The dust never truly settled after Isabella Montero's takeover of Luxury Motors. Like a stone dropped into a stagnant pond, the ripples of her actions continued spreading outward in ways no one, not even Isabella, could have fully anticipated. Across the automotive retail world, nervous executives pored over their customer service manuals, suddenly hyper-aware of every dismissive glance their sales teams might be throwing. The phrase "don't pull a Carlos" entered industry slang, whispered in showrooms from Munich to Mumbai. At one high-end dealership in Monaco, a sales manager was reportedly fired on the spot for rolling his eyes at a customer's budget. The incident caught on camera by the customer's teenage daughter, who captioned the viral video, "Guess who's about to become a billionaire's passion project?" Meanwhile, Luxury Motors' radical transparency policy, publishing true dealer costs on every vehicle, spawned copycats. A Berlin dealership took it further, installing live feeds of their service bays so customers could watch mechanics work. Their Yelp ratings soared. 2 years after Isabella's intervention, Luana Silva stood at a podium, accepting the Innovator of the Year award from the European Business Council. Her speech made headlines. "We didn't disrupt the industry by being ruthless. We did it by removing ruthlessness altogether." Back home, she'd transformed the dealership into a worker-owned cooperative, with profit sharing that paid Jorge's granddaughter's medical school tuition. The original showroom now housed a free financial literacy center in its former VIP lounge. The man who'd once lorded over Luxury Motors spent 6 months unemployed before swallowing his pride to drive for a rideshare app. His rating hovered at 3.2 stars. Talks too much about cars he can't afford. A viral moment came when he unknowingly picked up a Montero Holdings executive who recognized him. The dashcam footage, leaked by the executive's assistant, showed Carlos ranting about that vindictive witch before realizing his passenger's employer. The silence that followed was described by one commenter as the most expensive Uber ride in history. Isabella, when asked about him in an interview, simply said, "The universe doesn't need my help to deliver karma." The former janitor became an unlikely media darling, his blunt, "Tell me where they cheated you" TikTok series exposing dealership scams worldwide. When a major automaker tried to hire him as a consultant, he countered, "Pay me in cars. I'll give them to food bank drivers," they agreed. His proudest moment? Seeing his face on a mural in Lisbon's automotive district, captioned, "O homem que não mentiu," the man who didn't lie. Montero Holdings quietly acquired a chain of payday lenders, which she converted to low-interest microfinance institutions. Struggling women's prison, now being retrofitted into a tech training center. The bar where Carlos had celebrated her dumb money offer, its new bartender was his ex-wife. When Forbes asked about her strategy, she cited her mother's old saying, "When you clean house, start with the corners everyone ignores." 5 years post-takeover, a sociology student's doctoral thesis analyzed the Montero effect, how one act of public humiliation had shifted power dynamics across service industries. Their key finding? The fear of being on the wrong side. Of a billionaire's revenge, fantasy paled in comparison to the terror of being exposed as cruel in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, at the original Luxury Motors location, visitors noticed something odd. The LaFerrari's price tag now read 1, but only for customers who could prove they'd once been turned away for not looking like buyers.